"I'll never get married to you or accept this baby," the millionaire yelled. But 9 months later, one hospital door shattered his heart and brought him to his knees. Cruz Johnston never ran. People adjusted their pace to match his, assistants, investors, entire boardrooms. But tonight his shoes struck the hospital floor in uneven rhythm, breath tight, tie half loosened as if he'd forgotten he was supposed to look composed. He pushed through the sliding doors and barely noticed the receptionist calling after him. "Sir, you need to sign in." "Later," he said, voice rough, already moving again. The hallway stretched forward in a straight line that felt longer than any deal he'd ever negotiated. Monitors beeped somewhere behind closed rooms. A child laughed faintly from a distant corner. Life kept moving around him, calm and ordinary, while something inside his chest felt unfamiliar, urgent, uncalculated. 9 months ago, he had walked away from a decision with perfect certainty. Now he wasn't certain of anything. His phone buzzed again in his hand. Natasha's last message glowed on the screen. "She's asking for you." Cruz swallowed hard and kept moving. Nurses crossed in front of him carrying charts, speaking in quick, quiet tones. One glanced up at the sight of a sharply dressed man who looked like he belonged in a glass office tower, not a maternity wing. "Room 214, he asked. She nodded toward the far end. "Second left, thank you." He turned the corner too fast, nearly colliding with a rolling cart. The nurse pushing it steadied the tray and gave him a patient smile. "Take a breath," she said gently. He nodded, though he didn't slow down. His company, Johnston Urban Development, ran on careful timing, calculated risks, contracts signed months before anyone else even saw an opportunity. He built entire neighborhoods out of empty lots because he never moved without certainty. Tonight felt like stepping into a space without a blueprint. The closer he got, the quieter everything seemed. Even his thoughts softened into one repeating question. Would she want him there? He reached the hallway where the room numbers began with 210. His steps faltered, then resumed. Before he saw her, he heard her, soft, tired, warm in a way that made his chest ache. "She has your eyes," Brisa murmured inside the room, voice gentle enough that he almost missed it through the door. Cruz stopped. The world narrowed to that single sound, the same voice that once teased him across a bookstore counter, the same voice that told him safe didn't always mean alive. He lifted his hand toward the door but didn't touch it. 9 months earlier he had spoken a sentence he couldn't erase. He remembered the way her shoulders straightened when he said it, the quiet way she left instead of fighting. Now she was only a few feet away, holding a life he had refused. A nurse stepped out of a nearby room and paused beside him. "You okay?" He nodded once, eyes fixed on the door. "I just need a minute." The nurse gave him a small, understanding smile and moved on. Inside, the faint rustle of blankets sounded, followed by the softest laugh he'd ever heard from Brisa, fragile but real. Cruz leaned back against the wall, staring at the number on the door. How many decisions did it take to end up here? Cruz Johnston had spent years designing a future that made sense on paper. Investors trusted him. Cities trusted him. Even strangers trusted him to shape skylines. But one sentence, spoken in fear, had drawn a line between who he was and who he could have been. He exhaled slowly. "I don't even know if I deserve to be here," he whispered to no one. The hallway answered with silence. "If you're new here, welcome back to Mr. Williams' Story Time, where every journey starts with a choice, and sometimes the hardest part is admitting you were wrong." Cruz straightened his jacket automatically, a habit he couldn't shake even now. Somewhere behind that door was Brisa Ward, the woman who never cared about his money, his reputation, or the headlines that followed him. She cared about the person underneath all of it, and tonight he had to decide whether he would walk away again, or finally step forward. "Before we go further, tell me something. What was your first impression of Cruz when you saw him running down that hallway? Confident? Afraid? Or just a man who waited too long? And if stories about real choices and second chances mean something to you, don't forget to stay with us and subscribe so you don't miss what comes next." Cruz took a slow breath, grounding himself. The words sounded distant in his mind, replaced by a memory of Brisa's laughter echoing through a rainy street months earlier. He reached for the door again. His hand stopped just short. The hallway faded into the rhythm of falling rain against a cafe window. Brooklyn felt alive in a way Manhattan never did, music drifting from open doors, people arguing about art like it actually mattered. Cruz stood outside a small bookstore cafe, jacket damp at the shoulders, checking the time on his watch. He had ducked inside only to escape a sudden downpour after a long meeting about a new waterfront project. The scent of coffee and paper greeted him first, warm and inviting. Behind the counter, Brisa Ward stood arguing with a delivery driver, arms crossed but eyes bright. I ordered poetry, she said firmly. You signed for philosophy, the driver replied, tapping a tablet. Because someone mixed them up, she said, laughing softly. One makes you think too much, the other lets you feel. Cruz paused near the entrance, watching the exchange with quiet amusement. She turned toward him suddenly. Sorry, give me 1 second. No rush, he said. When the driver left, she faced him fully, brushing a strand of hair from her face. What can I get you? Coffee, he replied. She tilted her head. Good coffee or regret coffee? A corner of his mouth lifted. Good. She prepared it carefully, sliding the cup across the counter without any recognition of who he was. No raised eyebrows, no sudden change in tone, just genuine attention. First time here? She asked. Yes. Well, she said lightly, try not to work while you drink it, that's kind of the rule. I didn't know there were rules. There aren't, she said, smiling. Just suggestions. Outside, the rain continued, tapping steadily against the glass. Cruz took a sip and realized something strange. For the first time all day, he wasn't thinking about numbers or deadlines. He was thinking about her, and that was the moment everything started to change, long before a hospital door would ever make him question the life he thought he wanted. The bell above the cafe door chimed softly as Cruz stepped further inside, shaking rain from his coat. The space felt smaller than anywhere he usually spent time. Shelves filled with worn novels, handwritten price tags, mismatched chairs that looked chosen for comfort instead of status. A group of students debated near the window. Someone read poetry aloud from a corner table. Nothing about the place tried to impress him, and that alone made him stay longer than he planned. Brisa moved behind the counter with easy confidence, humming under her breath while arranging cups. She didn't rush, didn't glance at his watch or his suit, didn't treat him like a headline. Careful, she said, nodding toward a stack of books near his elbow. That tower falls if someone breathes too hard. I'll keep my distance, he replied. She leaned forward slightly. You look like someone who doesn't usually sit still. That obvious? She shrugged. You keep checking the door like another meeting is about to walk in. He almost laughed. Most people assumed things about him, wealth, ambition, control, but very few said it out loud. Maybe I'm just not used to quiet, he said. Well, she replied, sliding a napkin toward him. You picked the wrong cafe for that. Quiet doesn't last here. Outside, cars passed slowly through the street, their headlights reflecting off wet pavement. Cruz noticed he wasn't thinking about leaving anymore. He returned the next evening, and the one after that. Each visit started casually. Coffee, a few minutes of conversation, but something about Brisa's presence made time stretch differently. She asked questions without pressure, listening as if his answers mattered beyond small talk. What do you actually build? She asked one night, leaning against the counter as the cafe emptied. Communities, he said. Residential projects, mixed-use spaces, things that last. That sounds serious. It is. She studied him for a moment. Do you ever build something just because it feels right, not because it makes sense? He hesitated. I don't make decisions that way. That must get lonely, she said gently. Her words landed without accusation, just observation. He watched her write a customer's name on a cup in looping handwriting. There was no rush in her movements, no need to impress anyone. For someone used to rooms where every conversation carried hidden agendas, her honesty felt disarming. You don't look impressed, he said. I'm not unimpressed, she replied with a smile. I just don't measure people by what they own. He nodded slowly, absorbing that. A sudden burst of laughter filled the cafe when a regular customer attempted to recite a dramatic poem and forgot half the lines. Brisa clapped anyway, encouraging him, and Cruz noticed how easily she made people feel seen. You do that a lot, he said. Do what? Make people comfortable, she shrugged. Everyone walks in carrying something heavy. Coffee helps, but kindness works faster. Her words stayed with him longer than he expected. Later, she joined him at a small table near the window, bringing her own mug. Don't tell my boss I'm sitting down, she joked. You are the boss, he replied. She grinned. Exactly. The rain outside softened into a steady rhythm against the glass. Cruz watched her tuck her feet beneath the chair, completely at ease. Why this place? He asked. My aunt owned it before me, she said. I kept it alive because it felt like home. People need spaces that aren't about winning. He considered that. His world revolved around outcomes, profit margins, timelines, negotiations. But here, success looked like laughter and shared silence. When he finished his drink, he didn't stand up immediately. That's new, she teased. Most people rush out after 10 minutes. Maybe I'm starting to like poetry, he said. Her smile softened. Careful. That's how it starts. Over the next week, Cruz's visits turned into a habit he didn't question. He found himself walking slower when he approached the cafe, almost reluctant to bring the noise of his other life through the door. One evening, the place was nearly empty when he arrived. Brisa wiped down the counter, glancing up with a small wave. "You're late," she said. "Meeting ran long." She poured as usual without asking. "You look tired." "I'm fine." She raised an eyebrow. "That's not an answer." He leaned against the counter, watching her move between tasks with calm focus. "Do you ever worry about the future?" he asked suddenly. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I try not to live 10 steps ahead. I'd miss what's right in front of me." He looked down at his coffee, the steam rising slowly. "That sounds risky." "Maybe," she said, "but it's also honest." A comfortable silence settled between them. Outside, someone strummed a guitar on the sidewalk. Inside, the cafe lights cast a warm glow across shelves of books and quiet conversations. Cruz realized something subtle had shifted. He wasn't here to escape the rain anymore. He was here for her. Brisa glanced toward the clock. "I'm closing soon," she said, "but if you're not in a rush, there's a view of the bridge a few blocks away. It's nicer after dark." He hesitated only a second before nodding. "Lead the way." As they stepped outside together, the city felt less like a map of opportunities and more like a place where something unexpected could begin. And for the first time in years, Cruz Johnston walked without checking the time, unaware that each quiet step beside her was leading him closer to a choice that would change everything. The streets felt calmer as they left the cafe behind, the noise of passing cars fading into a steady hum. Cruz walked beside Brisa, hands in his coat pockets, unsure whether to speak or simply listen to the rhythm of their footsteps. "You're quieter out here," she said after a moment. "I spend most of my day talking," he replied. "Meetings, calls, negotiations, silence feels unfamiliar." "That's because silence makes people honest," she said lightly. He glanced at her. "You make it sound dangerous." "It is," she laughed. "You can't hide behind titles when nobody's impressed by them." They turned onto a path that led toward the bridge, city lights stretching ahead in long lines. Cruz noticed how easily she moved through the crowd, greeting strangers with small nods as if the whole neighborhood belonged to her. "Do people always talk to you?" he asked. "Only the ones who need a good coffee," she teased. "Or someone to listen." He nodded slowly, watching the skyline rise beyond the railing. For once, he wasn't analyzing property values or future developments. He was simply there, walking beside someone who didn't ask anything from him except presence. They stopped near the center of the bridge where the wind softened the sounds of the city below. Brisa leaned against the railing, looking out at the water reflecting distant lights. "You plan everything," she said suddenly. "That obvious?" "You check your watch even when there's nowhere to be," she replied, smiling gently. "It's like you're always 10 steps ahead of the moment." "It keeps things stable," he said. "Predictable. And does that make you happy?" The question caught him off guard. Happiness wasn't something people asked him about. Success, influence, results, those were familiar topics. He searched for an answer that sounded honest. "I don't think about it much," he admitted. She studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful rather than judgmental. "That sounds lonely," she said softly. He let out a slow breath. "Maybe it's just efficient." She laughed under her breath. "You talk like a man negotiating with his own feelings." "That's because feelings complicate things." "They also make things worth remembering," she replied. Her words settled into the quiet space between them. Cruz rested his forearms on the railing, watching a boat pass beneath the bridge. The lights shimmered on the water, shifting with every ripple. "My father believed stability was everything," he said after a long pause. "He built our business from nothing. Every risk was calculated. Every decision had to make sense." "And you followed that?" she asked. "It worked," he said simply. "People trust certainty." "But do they know you?" she asked. The question lingered longer than he expected. He turned toward her, noticing the way the wind moved a strand of hair across her cheek. "Not many," he admitted. She nodded, as if that confirmed something she already understood. "You know," she said, "there's a difference between being strong and being untouchable." He tilted his head slightly. "And which one am I?" "That's what you're still deciding," she said. He almost smiled. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence didn't feel heavy, just real, like a conversation that didn't need constant words to keep moving. They started walking again, slower this time. Cruz noticed he wasn't thinking about tomorrow's meetings or the emails waiting on his phone. "You live like you're always planning 10 steps ahead," Brisa said again, her tone softer now. "It keeps things safe," he replied. She looked at him, eyes steady. "Safe isn't always alive." The words landed deeper than he expected. He opened his mouth to respond but stopped, unsure how to argue with something that felt true. For years he had built a life designed to avoid uncertainty. relationships that never demanded too much, routines that never left room for chaos. Yet standing beside her, he felt something unfamiliar, a quiet pull toward moments he couldn't control. "Do you ever worry about getting hurt?" he asked. "Of course," she said, "but I'd rather feel something real than hide from it." Her honesty made him pause mid-step. A group of friends passed by laughing loudly, breaking the stillness for a moment before disappearing into the distance. The city moved around them, unaware of the subtle shift happening between two people who were only beginning to understand each other. At the end of the bridge, she slowed. "Well," she said, "this is usually where I turn back." He hesitated, reluctant for the evening to end. "Can I walk you home?" he asked. She studied him for a second, as if weighing something unspoken. Then she nodded. "Only if you promise not to check your watch for the next 10 minutes. He slipped his phone into his pocket without looking at it. "Deal." She laughed softly, and they continued down the street together. Two people moving without a clear destination, unaware that this simple walk would become one of the memories he'd hold on to long after everything else changed. Cruz noticed the change before he admitted it to himself. His morning still began early. Emails, site reports from Johnston Urban Development, calls with architects discussing timelines. Yet by late afternoon his attention drifted toward Brooklyn. Meetings ended faster. Assistants exchanged curious looks when he canceled evening reservations he once guarded fiercely. One Thursday his chief operations manager stepped into his office holding a stack of proposals. "You're leaving early again?" she asked carefully. "I've reviewed everything," he replied, signing the last page. "Send the revisions tomorrow." She hesitated. "You've been different lately." He met her gaze. "Different how?" "Less distant," she said, choosing her words. "Not bad, just unexpected." He nodded without explanation, grabbing his coat. The elevator ride down felt shorter than usual, anticipation replacing the constant hum of work in his mind. By the time he reached the cafe, Brisa was laughing with a customer over a stack of returned books. "You're early," she said when she spotted him. "I finished work," he replied. "That sounds suspicious," she teased. "Are you sure you didn't escape?" He allowed himself a small smile. Maybe a little. For someone who built his life on structure, showing up without a strict reason felt unfamiliar and strangely freeing. Their time together shifted from casual conversation to something softer, more natural. They walked through quiet side streets, stopping to watch a street musician play an old guitar. Sometimes they talked for hours, other times they sat in silence, sharing a slice of cake from a bakery that stayed open late. One evening they ended up at a small diner near the water. Neon lights reflected across the table as Brisa slid a milkshake toward him. "You always order coffee," she said. "Tonight you're trying something different." "I'm expanding my horizons," he replied. She laughed. "That sounds like a business statement." "It might be," he admitted. They clinked their glasses together lightly. "Tell me something honest," she said after a moment. "Not the version you give in meetings." He considered the question, tapping his fingers lightly against the table. "I don't know how to slow down," he said finally. "If I stop planning, I feel like everything could fall apart." She nodded thoughtfully. "And yet, you're sitting here." He glanced around the diner, the quiet chatter, the hum of a refrigerator behind the counter, realizing she was right. For once, he wasn't calculating outcomes. "You're dangerous," he said, half joking. "Why?" "You make ordinary moments feel important." Her expression softened. Maybe they always were. Another night, they walked along the river, city lights stretching across the water like scattered stars. Brisa reached for his hand but paused just short. "Is this okay?" she asked gently. He hesitated only a second before nodding. "It is." Her fingers intertwined with his, warm and steady. The simple contact sent an unexpected calm through him. Not overwhelming, just grounding. "You're quiet," she said. "I'm thinking." "That can be dangerous," she teased. "I'm realizing how much I used to rush through moments like this," he admitted, as if slowing down meant losing something. "And now? Now I'm not sure what I was trying to protect." She didn't respond right away. Instead, she squeezed his hand lightly, a silent acknowledgement that said more than words could. They stopped near a small overlook where a few people leaned against the railing. A couple danced quietly to music from someone's phone, laughing when they missed a step. Cruz watched them for a moment. "I used to believe control meant strength," he said quietly. "And what do you believe now?" "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I know this feels real." Brisa's smile softened at the edges. "That's a good place to start." A week later, she invited him to the rooftop of her apartment building. String lights hung between metal railings, casting a warm glow over a small garden of potted plants. "You come up here when you need to think?" he asked. "When I need to breathe," she replied. They sat side by side on a wooden bench, the city stretching endlessly beyond them. Cruz felt an unfamiliar pressure in his chest, words gathering but refusing to form. "You're different from anyone I've met," he said finally. She tilted her head. "Different good or different confusing? Both," he admitted. She laughed softly. "I'll take that." He turned toward her, ready to say something more, something honest and vulnerable, but the words caught in his throat. Years of caution held him back. "What?" she asked gently, noticing the shift in his expression. Didn't push, and that somehow made the silence easier. They sat there for a while, listening to distant music drifting up from the street below. When she rested her head lightly against his shoulder, he felt his carefully built routine slip a little further away. For the first time in years, Cruz Johnston wasn't measuring success by numbers or timelines. He was measuring it by how long he could stay in a moment without needing to control it. And though he didn't say it out loud, he knew something inside him had begun to change, quietly, steadily, leading him toward a choice he wasn't ready to face yet. The rooftop garden had become their unspoken meeting place. String lights swayed gently above them, casting a warm glow across wooden benches and small pots of herbs Brisa cared for like quiet companions. Cruz arrived later than usual that evening, his jacket still carrying the sharp scent of the city. He paused at the entrance, watching her water the plants, sleeves rolled up, completely unaware of how peaceful she looked from a distance. "You look like you survived a battle," she said when she noticed him. "Board meetings can feel like that," he replied. She handed him a glass of iced tea instead of coffee. "Sit, you're thinking too loudly again." He laughed softly, taking a seat beside her. For a while, neither of them spoke. The quiet didn't feel empty. It felt like space he didn't need to fill. "You know," she said eventually, "you don't have to carry everything alone." He looked at her, surprised by how easily she read him. "I'm used to it," he said. "Used to doesn't mean happy," she replied gently. Her words lingered in the air, heavier than usual. Cruz leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, staring out at the skyline. There was something he wanted to say, something that had been growing between them for weeks, but it sat at the edge of his thoughts like a risk he couldn't calculate. Brisa shifted closer, her shoulder brushing lightly against his. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "Not distant, just thoughtful." "I've been trying to understand something," he admitted. "And what's that?" "How you make everything feel simpler," he said. "Not easier, just clearer." She smiled faintly. "That's probably because I don't overthink things the way you do." "That might be true," he said, glancing down at his hands. "Most of my life has been about avoiding mistakes." "And do you think that works?" she asked. "It keeps things stable," he said automatically, then paused, realizing how familiar that answer sounded. She watched him carefully. Stability is good, but sometimes it keeps people from saying what they really feel. Her gaze didn't pressure him. It invited honesty. He took a slow breath. "What if saying something changes everything?" "Then maybe it was important enough to say," she replied. The words sat between them, waiting. Cruz turned toward her fully, his expression softer than she'd ever seen. For a moment it looked like he was about to cross a line he had carefully avoided. He started, but the sentence stopped there. Instead of finishing the thought, he leaned back against the bench, eyes drifting toward the lights of Manhattan in the distance. "Work has been intense," he said, changing direction. "A new waterfront project. Investors are pushing for faster timelines." Brisa didn't interrupt him, though she clearly noticed the shift. "You don't have to talk about business every time things get real," she said softly. He exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "I know, it's just easier." She nodded, accepting his pace without judgment. "You don't have to rush anything," she added. "Whatever this is between us, it doesn't need a perfect definition." Her words should have relieved him, yet they also made him aware of how much he wanted to say and how afraid he was of saying it wrong. He watched her tuck a loose strand of hair behind her ear, noticing how natural everything felt when he was with her. No expectations, no negotiations, just presence. "You deserve someone who knows what they want," he said quietly. She tilted her head. "And what do you want?" The question hung in the air, heavier than anything she'd asked before. He opened his mouth, ready to answer honestly, ready to admit that being with her felt like stepping into a life he had never planned, but years of caution pressed against his chest. "I'm still figuring that out," he said instead. She nodded slowly, hiding a flicker of disappointment behind a gentle smile. "That's fair," she said. The city lights reflected in her eyes as she leaned back, looking up at the sky. "You know," she said after a while, "most people think big moments come with grand speeches, but sometimes the important things are the ones we almost say." Cruz glanced at her, surprised by how accurately she described the tension he felt. Maybe, he admitted. She nudged his shoulder lightly. Hey, I'm not going anywhere tonight. You don't have to rush your thoughts. Her calm acceptance made him feel both grateful and restless. He wanted to tell her that she mattered more than any deal he had closed, more than any success he had chased, but the words stayed locked behind a wall he had built long ago. Instead, they sat together in comfortable silence, the sound of distant music drifting upward from the streets below. After a while, she rested her head lightly against his shoulder again. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the quiet settle around them. It felt like standing at the edge of a decision he wasn't ready to make, a confession waiting just beyond reach. And though neither of them knew it yet, that unfinished sentence would follow him long after this peaceful night ended, echoing louder when everything else began to change. Cruz arrived at his penthouse earlier than usual, loosening his tie as he stepped inside. The city stretched wide beyond the windows, glowing under the fading light. Normally he would have moved straight to his desk, reviewing numbers and projections long into the night. Instead, he checked his phone. A message from Brisa waited there. "Can we talk tonight?" The words were simple, but something about them felt heavier than usual. He replied immediately, "Come over." An hour later, the elevator doors opened and she stepped into his apartment, carrying the same calm presence she always brought with her. Yet tonight there was a quiet seriousness in her eyes. "You've never invited me here this early," she said softly, glancing around at the sleek space. "I thought it was time," he replied, offering her a glass of water. She accepted it but didn't sit right away. Her gaze lingered on the skyline, then returned to him. "You've built a life that feels very controlled," she said gently. "It works," he answered. She nodded, though her expression remained thoughtful. Dinner sat untouched on the table between them, a rare sign that he wasn't fully focused on routine. The silence stretched longer than usual, filled with something unspoken. "Cruz," she began, her voice steady but softer than he'd ever heard it. "There's something I need to tell you." He leaned back slightly, giving her space. "What is it?" She exhaled slowly, gathering her courage. "I'm pregnant." The words didn't echo or explode. They settled quietly in the room, almost gentle, yet they shifted everything. Cruz blinked once, as if his mind needed a moment to catch up. "Pregnant," he repeated, the word unfamiliar on his tongue. She nodded. "I found out a few days ago. I wanted to tell you in person." He stood up automatically, pacing a few steps toward the window. Below them, the city moved normally, cars turning corners, lights flickering on, unaware that his carefully ordered life had just changed direction. "This wasn't part of the plan," he said quietly. Brisa didn't argue. She simply watched him, waiting. "I know," she replied after a moment. "Some things don't arrive with permission." Her calmness contrasted sharply with the rush of thoughts in his mind. Responsibilities, headlines, expectations. Every risk he had spent years avoiding suddenly felt unavoidable. He turned back toward her. "How do you feel about it?" "Nervous," she admitted, "but also hopeful." Her honesty made his chest tighten. Cruz walked slowly back toward the table, his movements careful, measured. "This changes everything," he said. "Yes," she answered. "It does." He ran a hand through his hair, searching for something logical to hold on to. "My life is, complicated," he said. "The company is expanding. Investors expect stability. I've never—" He stopped, unable to finish the thought. "Never imagined being a father?" she asked gently. He didn't respond immediately. The idea felt enormous. Not just a child, but a future he had never allowed himself to picture. He had always believed that staying in control meant avoiding risks that could reshape his life overnight. Brisa stepped closer, her voice calm. "I'm not here to trap you into anything. I just wanted you to know." Her words weren't demanding. They carried quiet strength, leaving the decision space open rather than forcing it. That openness made the pressure feel even heavier. He looked at her, the woman who had slowly drawn him out of his carefully guarded world, and felt something inside him pull in two directions at once. One side wanted to step forward, to accept the unknown. The other clung tightly to the life he had spent years building. Silence filled the penthouse again. Outside, a helicopter passed slowly across the skyline, its distant hum fading into the night. Cruz rested his hands on the back of a chair, trying to steady his thoughts. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he said finally. Brisa didn't look surprised. "I didn't expect you to have all the answers tonight," she said. "I just needed you to hear the truth." Her composure made him feel both grateful and uneasy. "What do you want from me?" he asked. She considered the question carefully. "Honesty," she said. "Nothing more." He nodded slowly, though he wasn't sure what honesty looked like in a moment like this. Every instinct pushed him toward caution, toward protecting the structure of his life before anything else. She moved toward the window, standing beside him as they both looked out at the city lights. "No matter what happens," she said quietly, "this is real, and I'm not afraid of it." Her courage contrasted sharply with the uncertainty building inside him. He opened his mouth to respond, feeling the weight of a decision forming, one that would either bring them closer or create a distance neither of them could ignore. The room felt still, suspended between two futures. And though neither of them knew exactly how the next conversation would unfold, they both sensed that whatever was said next would change everything. The air inside the penthouse grew quieter after Brisa's last words. Cruz stood near the window, hands resting against the cool glass as the city lights reflected across his face. Every instinct told him to find the right response, something measured, something responsible, yet nothing felt steady enough to say out loud. Brisa remained near the table, calm but watchful. "You don't have to decide anything tonight," she said gently. "I just wanted you to know where I am, and what's coming." Her tone wasn't demanding. That made the moment harder. He turned toward her slowly. "This isn't small, Brisa. I know," she replied. "I'm not pretending it is." He paced once across the room, a habit that surfaced whenever uncertainty crept in. Contracts, negotiations, even conflicts. He always found clarity by moving, by analyzing every possible outcome. But this wasn't a business decision. This was a life he couldn't predict. "You deserve someone who's completely ready," he said quietly. "Someone who can step into this without hesitation." She watched him carefully. "And you think you're not that person?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Everything feels out of control." Her expression softened, though a hint of sadness flickered behind her eyes. "Sometimes control isn't the point," she said. Cruz stopped pacing and faced her fully. "My entire life is built on stability," he said. "I've spent years making sure nothing unexpected could take everything apart. This changes the direction of everything I've planned." Brisa nodded slowly, absorbing his words. "I'm not asking you to abandon your life," she replied. "I'm asking you to be honest about whether there's space in it for us." The word us hung between them. He felt a tightening in his chest, not anger, not resentment, just fear disguised as logic. "What if I fail?" he asked quietly. "What if I can't give you what you deserve?" She stepped closer, voice steady. "Then we figure it out together. That's what partnership means." The simplicity of her answer unsettled him more than any argument could. He wanted certainty. She offered trust, and trust felt like standing without a safety net. The words left his mouth before he fully understood them. "I'll never get married to you or accept this baby," he said, voice colder than he intended. "I'm not ready for that life." The sentence hung in the room, sharp and final. For a moment Brisa didn't move. She simply looked at him, not with anger but with a quiet sadness that felt heavier than any confrontation. "I see," she said softly. He realized immediately that the words sounded harsher than the fear behind them, but pride and confusion held him still. "This isn't about you," he added quickly. "It's about everything else." She nodded once, absorbing the explanation without interruption. "You're right," she said after a moment. "It's about what you're afraid of." Her calmness made his chest tighten. She reached for her bag slowly, movement steady. "I didn't come here to convince you," she continued. "I came here because I believed you deserved to know the truth." "I do," he said, though the words felt insufficient. She paused near the door, turning back toward him. "I won't beg someone to stay," she said gently. "Not even you." The elevator doors opened with a soft chime as she stepped inside. Cruz stood frozen in the middle of the room, watching her reflection fade in the closing doors. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. He walked slowly back toward the window, staring at the city that once felt so predictable. The skyline hadn't changed. Buildings stood exactly where he expected them to be, yet everything inside him felt unsettled. His phone buzzed with a message from his assistant asking about tomorrow's schedule. He ignored it, replaying the conversation in his mind. Brisa's steady voice, her calm acceptance, the way she didn't try to fight him. He ran a hand across his face, exhaling slowly. "I did the right thing," he murmured to himself, though the words didn't sound convincing. Across the city, life continued without pause. Traffic lights shifting, late-night diners filling with quiet conversations, while inside the penthouse the absence of her presence felt louder than anything else. And though he wouldn't admit yet, Cruz Johnston had just spoken a sentence that would follow him long after this night ended. Echoing louder with every moment he realized what he had lost. Weeks passed, and from the outside, Cruz Johnston appeared unchanged. Morning briefings filled his schedule, Investors gathered around long glass tables while digital blueprints of future neighborhoods glowed across massive screens. His company, Johnston Urban Development, moved forward with ambitious projects along the waterfront, and the media praised his ability to stay focused under pressure. Phase 3 approval just came through, his operations manager said during one meeting. The council moved faster than expected. Good, Cruz replied, signing the final document without hesitation. Push the timeline forward by 2 weeks. He spoke with confidence, voice steady, posture controlled. No one in the room noticed how he paused a second longer than usual after meetings ended, as if waiting for something that never arrived. Late at night, he returned to his penthouse, the silence greeting him like an unfinished conversation. The rooftop garden she once admired felt colder now, untouched. He told himself he had made the logical choice, yet logic didn't fill the empty spaces. Across the city, Brisa moved into a smaller apartment near the cafe, carrying only what she truly needed. Boxes lined the walls for a few days before she slowly unpacked them, arranging books and soft blankets in a way that made the space feel warm. Natasha stopped by often, bringing groceries and quiet encouragement. "You don't have to do everything alone," Natasha said one afternoon, setting a bag of fresh fruit on the counter. "I'm not alone," Brisa replied with a gentle smile, resting a hand against her stomach. "I have a reason to keep going." She worked shorter shifts at the cafe, choosing calm over exhaustion. Regular customers noticed the subtle change in her energy, softer, more thoughtful, but she didn't share details unless asked directly. One evening, a young woman approached the counter nervously. "Can I ask you something?" the customer said. "How do you stay so calm when life changes suddenly?" Brisa paused, considering her answer. "I remind myself that fear doesn't decide my future," she said quietly. "My choices do." Her words carried no bitterness, only quiet determination. Cruz found himself walking past the bookstore cafe one night after a late meeting. He hadn't planned it, his feet simply carried him there. The lights inside glowed warmly, and laughter drifted onto the sidewalk. Through the window, he saw Brisa behind the counter, speaking to a group of regulars. She looked steady, not broken, not waiting. He stood there for a moment longer than he intended, hands in his coat pockets. The urge to step inside rose and faded just as quickly. He turned away before she noticed him. Back in his car, he stared out at the street, remembering the first time she teased him about good coffee or regret coffee. A faint smile crossed his face, then disappeared. He drove home without turning on the radio, the quiet inside the car filled with memories he couldn't silence. Seasons shifted slowly. Spring gave way to summer, sunlight stretching longer across the city. Cruz's projects grew larger, his reputation stronger, yet moments of stillness felt heavier than before. During one presentation, a colleague mentioned the importance of building spaces where families could grow. The word families caught him off guard, forcing him to pause mid-sentence before continuing. That evening he sat alone at his dining table, staring at a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Meanwhile, Brisa prepared for motherhood with quiet resilience, attending appointments, reading late into the night, surrounding herself with small reminders of hope rather than fear. She didn't chase him. She didn't call. She moved forward. And though neither of them said it aloud, the distance between their worlds grew wider with every passing week, a silent countdown leading toward a moment neither of them could fully predict. By early autumn, Cruz's calendar looked fuller than ever. Johnston Urban Development had secured a major contract transforming an old industrial block into modern housing, and industry magazines praised his unshakable focus. He stood at the front of a conference room, presenting architectural plans, while investors nodded approvingly. "This project isn't just about buildings," he said evenly. "It's about creating spaces where people feel grounded." The words sounded polished, rehearsed, yet halfway through the sentence he hesitated. Grounded. The word echoed differently than it used to. After the meeting, his assistant handed him a tablet filled with congratulatory messages. "You've been invited to speak at the Urban Futures Summit," she said. "Everyone wants to hear how you stay ahead of uncertainty." He gave a brief nod. "Schedule it." But as he walked back to his office, the applause from the conference room faded quickly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than usual. Later that evening, Cruz stopped at a small grocery store near his building, something he rarely did himself. As he reached for a bottle of sparkling water, he noticed a father kneeling to help his toddler choose a snack from a low shelf. The child laughed loudly, gripping the man's finger with absolute trust. Cruz looked away quickly, unsettled by the unexpected pull in his chest. At the register, the cashier smiled politely. "Long day?" "Something like that," he replied. Outside, he paused before getting into his car, watching families walk past under the glow of streetlights. Conversations blended together, casual, ordinary, full of life he usually passed without noticing. He realized he had begun noticing small things more often: a stroller parked outside a cafe, a lullaby playing softly through an apartment window, the way people leaned toward each other when they laughed. None of it fit neatly into the life he had planned. Back at the penthouse, Cruz stood on the rooftop garden where he and Brisa once spent quiet evenings. The plant she admired had grown slightly wild, leaves stretching toward the light as if waiting for attention. He touched one gently, remembering the way she used to run her fingers along the edges, naming each one like an old friend. "You make ordinary moments feel important," he murmured to himself, repeating words he once said to her. The memory made him close his eyes briefly. He replayed their conversations, her laughter in the bookstore cafe, her calm voice on the bridge, the way she looked at him when he nearly confessed something he didn't fully understand at the time. And then the sentence he couldn't take back. He exhaled slowly, the city stretching endlessly below him. "I thought control meant strength," he said quietly. The words sounded hollow against the open air. The following morning, Cruz sat across from his longtime business partner during a strategy session. "You've been distracted lately," the partner said bluntly. "Everything's still running smoothly, but you're not as present." "I'm fine," Cruz replied automatically. "Fine isn't the same as focused," the man said, leaning back in his chair. "Whatever's on your mind, don't let it turn into regret." The comment lingered long after the meeting ended. Later that afternoon, Cruz walked past the bookstore cafe again. This time he slowed down, watching through the window as Brisa laughed with a group of customers. She looked stronger than he remembered, calm, confident, moving forward without hesitation. He almost stepped inside. Almost. Instead, he turned away once more, telling himself it was better to keep distance. Yet, as he walked back toward his car, he realized something he had been avoiding for months. Control had given him success, but it hadn't protected him from missing the one life that might have mattered more than anything he built. The boardroom overlooking the Hudson buzzed with quiet anticipation. Executives from Johnston Urban Development sat around a polished table while a presentation screen displayed the newest expansion proposal, a project large enough to reshape entire neighborhoods. Cruz stood at the head of the room, voice steady, posture composed. "If we finalize this partnership today, construction begins within 3 months," he said, guiding the discussion with the calm authority everyone expected from him. Investors exchanged approving nods. Charts shifted across the screen, numbers aligning perfectly with projections. For anyone watching, he looked exactly like the man he had always been: controlled, decisive, untouchable. His phone vibrated once against the table. He ignored it. The conversation continued, filled with technical details and long-term strategies, until the phone buzzed again, and again. A faint crease formed between his brows. "Excuse me," he said quietly, stepping away from the table. He glanced down at the screen. Natasha calling. A wave of unease moved through him. Natasha rarely reached out unless something mattered deeply to Brisa. He answered immediately. "Is everything okay?" Her voice came through, urgent but steady. "Cruz, Brisa's in the hospital." His grip tightened around the phone. "She's giving birth," Natasha added gently. The words landed with unexpected weight, knocking the air from his lungs. For a moment he couldn't respond. "I thought you should know," she said. "Whether you come or not, that's your choice." The call ended softly, leaving him standing alone in the hallway, the distant murmur of boardroom voices barely reaching him. Cruz stared at his reflection in the glass wall, suit perfectly tailored, expression usually unreadable. But now uncertainty showed clearly in his eyes. He thought about the months that had passed, the distance he maintained, the sentence that created it. Inside the boardroom, someone called his name, asking about the next slide. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned, walking quickly toward the elevators. His assistant hurried after him. "The investors are waiting. Should I delay the meeting?" "Cancel it," he said. Her eyes widened slightly. "Cancel? All of it?" "Yes." The elevator doors opened, and he stepped inside without another word. As the car descended, he loosened his tie, breath uneven. For the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about consequences or reputation. He was thinking about her. The city blurred past as his car moved through traffic. Cruz leaned forward slightly, urging the driver to go faster without saying it out loud. Every red light felt like a question he didn't know how to answer. Would she want him there? Was it too late? His phone screen lit up with a new message from Natasha, room 214. He read it twice, committing the number to memory. When the hospital finally came into view, he stepped out of the car before it fully stopped, moving quickly toward the entrance. The sliding doors opened, releasing a rush of warm air and distant voices. For the first time in years, Cruz Johnston ran without a plan, not as a businessman, not as a man in control, but as someone finally willing to face a moment he once tried to avoid. And with every step down the corridor, the distance between the life he built and the life he almost lost began to close. The hallway stretched ahead of Cruz like a quiet test he hadn't prepared for. Room numbers passed slowly on the walls, 208, 210, 212, each step heavier than the last. His breathing slowed, but his thoughts refused to settle. He noticed everything and nothing at once. The hum of distant conversations, the soft roll of a cart moving somewhere behind him, the muted glow of ceiling lights reflecting against polished floors. Room 214 waited at the end. He stopped a few feet away, staring at the door as if it held an answer he wasn't ready to hear. Months ago, he had chosen distance because it felt safe. Now safety felt like the one thing standing between him and the truth. A nurse passing by offered a reassuring smile. "You here for someone special?" He hesitated, then nodded. "She's just inside," the nurse said gently, stepping aside. His hand hovered near the door handle, uncertain. Before entering, memories surfaced without warning. Brisa laughing over a cup of coffee, her voice teasing him on the bridge, the quiet strength in her eyes the night she walked away from his penthouse. He leaned briefly against the wall, closing his eyes. "I don't know if I deserve to be here," he whispered, but the thought of leaving again felt heavier than any fear. From inside the room came a soft sound, the faint rustle of blankets, followed by Brisa's voice, tired yet warm. "She's finally sleeping," she murmured to someone. The words reached him like an invitation he hadn't expected. He straightened, breath steadying as he finally pushed the door open. The room felt quiet, filled with soft afternoon light. Brisa sat propped against the bed, hair slightly tousled, holding a newborn wrapped carefully in white. Natasha stood near the window, offering Cruz a small nod before stepping out to give them space. Brisa looked up slowly. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "I didn't think you'd come," she said softly. Her voice carried no accusation, only surprise. "I almost didn't deserve to," he replied, the honesty slipping out before he could soften it. She studied him, searching his face for something familiar. The tension that once filled the space between them felt quieter now, replaced by exhaustion and something gentler. He stepped closer, eyes drawn toward the tiny bundle in her arms. "That's," he began, unsure how to finish the sentence. "Our daughter," she said simply. The word settled deep inside him. He had built towers that changed skylines, negotiated deals worth millions, yet nothing prepared him for the fragile reality resting just inches away. Brisa adjusted the blanket carefully. "Do you want to hold her?" The question caught him off guard. "Are you sure?" he asked. She nodded once. He hesitated only a moment before reaching out, hands slightly unsteady as she guided the baby into his arms. The world seemed to slow the second he held her. She stirred lightly, tiny fingers curling against his sleeve, completely unaware of the complicated history that brought him into this room. Cruz exhaled slowly, something inside him shifting in a way he couldn't explain. "I was afraid," he admitted quietly, eyes fixed on the child, "not of you, but of loving something I couldn't control." Brisa listened without interrupting. "I thought walking away would protect everything I built," he continued, "but it just showed me how empty control can feel." The baby moved slightly, her small breath warm against his hand. He lowered himself carefully to one knee beside the bed. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, just honest. "I don't expect forgiveness," he said softly. "I just want the chance to show up now, if you'll let me." Brisa's expression softened, a mixture of relief and caution crossing her face. "This isn't something you fix in one moment," she said gently. "I know," he replied. "I'm not here to fix anything. I'm here to stay, if that's still possible." Silence filled the room again, but this time it felt different, less heavy, more open. She reached out slowly, touching his shoulder. "We'll see," she said. "One day at a time." He nodded, accepting the uncertainty. Outside the window, the city continued moving, unaware that behind one quiet hospital door, a man who once believed strength meant control had finally allowed himself to be vulnerable, and in doing so stepped into a life he never thought he was ready to live. Cruz remained beside the bed, the newborn resting carefully in his arms. The room felt smaller now, quieter, as if everything outside had faded into the background. He studied her tiny face, the gentle rise and fall of her breathing, the way her hand curled instinctively around his finger. It was a fragile connection, yet stronger than any agreement he had ever signed. "She's calm," he said softly, almost to himself. Brisa watched him closely, exhaustion visible but softened by a faint smile. "She's been that way since she arrived, like she already knows how to listen." He let out a slow breath, feeling something unfamiliar settle inside him. Not pressure, not fear, just presence. "I thought I understood responsibility," he admitted quietly. "But this feels different." "It is," Brisa said gently. "It's not about control. It's about showing up, even when you're unsure." Her words echoed the conversation they once shared on the bridge, only now they carried deeper meaning. He shifted slightly, still kneeling, careful not to wake the baby. "I replayed that night more times than I want to admit," he said. "Every word, every pause. I thought distance would make things easier, but it only made me realize how wrong I was." Brisa listened, her expression calm yet guarded. "You were honest," she said after a moment. "Painful, but honest." "I wasn't brave," he replied. "I was afraid of a future I couldn't predict." She nodded slowly. "Fear doesn't make you a bad person. Staying silent forever might have." He glanced up at her, surprised by the softness in her tone. "I don't expect you to forget anything," he continued. "I just want to learn how to be here now, without pretending I have all the answers." Her gaze softened further, though she didn't rush to close the distance between them emotionally. "That's a start," she said. The baby stirred lightly, and Cruz adjusted his hold instinctively. The movement felt natural, as if something inside him had shifted into place without effort. "What's her name?" he asked. Brisa smiled faintly. "Arya," he repeated it quietly, testing the sound of it. "It suits her," he said. She watched him carefully. "You don't have to make promises you're not ready for. Showing up today, that already means something." He shook his head gently. "I don't want to be the man who appears only when it's convenient. If I'm here, it's because I want to learn what this life looks like, even if I'm still figuring myself out." Brisa's eyes searched his face, as if measuring the sincerity behind his words. "Consistency matters more than grand speeches," she said. "I understand that now," he replied. Natasha knocked softly before stepping back into the room, carrying a small bag of food. She paused when she saw Cruz still kneeling beside the bed, holding Arya carefully. "Well," she said with a gentle smile, "looks like someone found his place." Cruz stood slowly, handing the baby back to Brisa with surprising reluctance. "Thank you," Brisa said quietly. "For what?" he asked. "For coming," she replied. "For listening instead of trying to fix everything." He nodded, understanding the weight behind her words. "I'll come back tomorrow," he said, hesitating slightly. "If that's okay." She met his gaze. "You don't have to ask permission to be present. Just be consistent." A small smile touched his face, the kind that didn't come from confidence but from relief. As he walked toward the door, he paused one last time, looking back at Brisa and Arya together. The room felt warmer than when he arrived, filled with something he hadn't felt in years. Not control, not certainty, but a quiet sense of belonging that didn't require perfection. And as he stepped into the hallway again, Cruz Johnston realized that kneeling beside that hospital bed hadn't made him weaker. It had made him honest. Cruz returned the next morning exactly when he said he would. No grand entrance, no dramatic gestures, just a quiet knock on Brisa's apartment door with a small bag of groceries balanced in one hand. She opened the door slowly, Arya resting against her shoulder. "You really came back," she said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "I said I would," he replied simply. The apartment felt warm and lived in, filled with soft blankets and stacks of books. It was smaller than the spaces he usually occupied, yet it carried a calm energy he hadn't realized he missed. Natasha waved from the kitchen. "He even beat me here," she teased before slipping out, leaving them alone. Cruz set the groceries on the counter. "I wasn't sure what you needed, so I guessed." Brisa glanced inside the bag. Fruit, tea, a few ready-made meals, and gave a small nod. "That's thoughtful." He didn't stay long that day. He didn't try to take control or offer solutions. He simply sat nearby while she fed Arya, asking quiet questions and listening to the rhythm of her voice. When he left, the silence felt lighter than before. Over the next few weeks, his visits became routine, short, consistent, and steady. Sometimes he brought coffee from the cafe. Other times he arrived with nothing but a calm presence, helping fold laundry or rocking Arya gently while Brisa rested. "You don't talk as much as you used to," she observed one afternoon. "I'm learning," he said. "Listening takes more patience than leading." She smiled faintly at that. One evening Arya began to fuss while Brisa tried to finish a phone call with a supplier. Cruz hesitated only a moment before lifting the baby carefully, pacing slowly across the room. "She likes music," Brisa said, covering the receiver. "Soft humming works." He nodded and began humming quietly, unsure at first, but gradually finding a steady rhythm. Arya settled almost immediately, her small hand resting against his collar. When Brisa ended the call, she watched the scene with quiet gratitude. "You look comfortable," she said. "I'm starting to be," he admitted. Not every moment felt easy. There were days when Brisa remained distant, observing rather than engaging deeply. Trust didn't return overnight, and Cruz never pushed for reassurance. Instead, he showed up. He fixed a loose cabinet door without making a big deal about it. He read aloud from a children's book one afternoon, stumbling slightly over the rhythm but laughing when Arya blinked up at him as if listening closely. "You don't have to prove anything," Brisa told him once. "I'm not trying to prove," he replied. "I'm trying to learn." Her gaze softened at the sincerity in his voice. One night, as he prepared to leave, she paused him near the door. "You've changed," she said quietly. "I'm trying to understand what matters," he answered. She nodded, not fully letting down her guard but no longer holding him at a distance. As weeks turned into months, Cruz began reshaping his schedule. Fewer late-night meetings, more evenings spent in the small apartment filled with lullabies and quiet conversation. He discovered a different kind of rhythm, warming bottles, pacing slowly across the living room, listening to Brisa talk about the cafe's regular customers. One evening, while Arya slept peacefully nearby, Brisa leaned back against the couch and studied him. "You used to look at everything like a problem to solve," she said. "Now you just stay." He considered her words carefully. "I realized I spent years chasing control because I thought it meant safety. But being here, even when I don't know what comes next, feels more real." She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she reached for a blanket and draped it lightly over his shoulders when she noticed he looked tired. The gesture felt simple, yet it carried a quiet closeness they hadn't shared in a long time. For the first time since the hospital, the space between them felt less like a distance to cross, and more like a path they were learning to walk together, slowly, honestly, without promises they weren't ready to make. Autumn settled gently over the city, painting the park paths in shades of gold and amber. Cruz walked beside Brisa, pushing Arya's stroller at an easy pace. The rhythm of their steps felt natural now. No tension, no careful distance, just quiet companionship. Arya reached toward falling leaves, small fingers opening and closing, as if trying to catch the colors drifting through the air. "She's curious about everything," Brisa said with a soft laugh. "She takes after you," Cruz replied. Brisa glanced at him, amused. "Not you." "I spent most of my life avoiding surprises," he admitted. "She's teaching me to notice them." They paused near a bench overlooking the water. The afternoon light softened around them, and for a moment the world felt still. Cruz reached into his coat pocket, fingers brushing against something small he had carried for weeks without knowing when to give it to her. Brisa handed him a thin bracelet engraved with Arya's name. "I kept this from the day she was born," she said quietly. "I wasn't sure when to give it to you, but it felt right today." He turned the bracelet over in his hands, tracing the delicate letters with his thumb. The simplicity of the gift struck him deeper than anything expensive ever could. "You saved this for me?" he asked. She nodded. "Because you showed up, not perfectly, but honestly." He exhaled slowly, emotion settling behind his steady expression. "I used to think big gestures proved commitment," he said. "Now I know it's the quiet moments that matter most." She watched him carefully, sensing something shifting beneath his calm tone. Cruz stepped slightly away from the bench, turning to face her fully. "I've spent months trying to understand who I was before you, and who I've become since," he said softly. "I once said I would never accept this life. I thought control was the only way to stay safe." Brisa remained still, eyes steady on his. He lowered himself onto one knee, not with the confidence of a perfectly planned proposal, but with the humility of someone who had learned through mistakes. "I don't want perfection anymore," he continued. "I want honesty, I want partnership, and I want to keep choosing you, every day, even when it's complicated." The park around them continued quietly, distant laughter, leaves rustling, yet the moment felt intimate and grounded. He held out the bracelet gently. "I don't expect you to forget the past," he said. "But if you're willing, I want to build a future together, not because it's easy, but because it's real." Brisa's eyes filled with emotion, though her smile remained calm. "I never needed perfect," she whispered. "Just real." She stepped closer, helping him rise from his knee before wrapping her arms around him. The embrace felt different from anything they had shared before. No hesitation, no unspoken distance, just warmth and quiet relief. Arya made a soft sound from the stroller, as if reacting to the shift in energy between them. Brisa laughed lightly through her emotion. I think she approves. Cruz glanced down at their daughter, then back at Brisa. I used to believe love meant having all the answers, he said. Now I know it means staying even when you don't. She squeezed his hand gently. That's all I ever wanted. They walked back toward the path together, leaves crunching softly beneath their steps, the future no longer something to control, but something to grow into side by side. Morning light filled the small kitchen as Cruz tied Arya's shoelaces while she balanced on one foot, giggling at her own impatience. Too tight? He asked. Perfect, she declared, spinning in a small circle before running toward Brisa, who stood by the window holding a mug of tea. Life had shifted in ways he never expected. His company still thrived, but his schedule looked different now. Fewer late nights, more early mornings filled with laughter and small routines. Brisa watched him with a quiet smile. You used to hate mornings like this, she teased. I used to hate anything that wasn't planned, he replied. Arya tugged at his sleeve. Story time tonight? Always, he promised, lifting her easily into his arms. Moments like these felt richer than any success he had chased before, simple, steady, and real. Later that week, Cruz found himself walking through the hospital again, this time beside Brisa as they attended a charity event supporting young families. The hallway looked exactly as it had years ago, yet everything felt different. The tension he once carried had been replaced by calm awareness. He paused near room 214, glancing at the door with a thoughtful expression. You're quiet, Brisa said gently. This place used to feel like a turning point I wasn't ready for, he admitted. And now? He looked down the hallway, remembering the moment he first stepped inside, uncertain, afraid, unsure if he belonged there at all. Now it feels like the beginning of everything that matters, he said. She slipped her hand into his, a gesture that felt natural after all they had been through. As they walked toward the exit, Cruz noticed a young man pacing nervously outside a room, eyes filled with uncertainty. The sight reminded him of himself years earlier. He paused briefly, offering a reassuring nod. Whatever's behind that door, he said quietly, you're stronger than you think. The man nodded back, visibly relieved by the simple encouragement. Outside, the city stretched wide and bright. Cruz took a deep breath, feeling grounded in a way he never had before. You know, Brisa said, leaning lightly against him, you once told me poetry made you uncomfortable. He laughed softly. I just hadn't found the right lines yet. She smiled. And now? Now I know the best stories aren't about control, he replied. They're about showing up even after you've made mistakes. That evening, Cruz sat beside Arya's bed, reading from a small book she had chosen earlier at the cafe. And the hero learned that courage wasn't about being perfect, he read aloud, voice calm and steady. Arya's eyes slowly drifted closed. He brushed a strand of hair from her forehead, a quiet ritual he never rushed. As he turned off the light, he paused for a moment in the doorway, remembering the man he used to be. Someone who believed strength came from control and distance. Now strength looked different. It looked like presence. It looked like patience. It looked like kneeling down to tie shoelaces, listening instead of leading, and choosing love even when the path wasn't clear. Every story begins with a choice, and sometimes the hardest choice is admitting you were wrong and deciding to grow anyway. Cruz Johnston once believed that walking away would protect his future. Instead, the door he feared the most became the one that opened his heart. If this journey made you feel something, whether it was hope, reflection, or even frustration, share your thoughts below. What moment changed your view of Cruz the most? And if you enjoy stories about second chances, growth, and real-life choices, don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Williams Storytime so you don't miss the next chapter waiting to be told.